Hey, what's up? Hello, griefsense familia. How we doing today? If you don't already know what the movement is about, it's about normalizing griefsense. What does that mean? That means normalizing conversations around death. And we do that through holding space to talk about loss, confronting our mortality. And we also do this through the lens of social justice, creative expression, community care, as well as pop culture. So as you interact with these episodes, please reflect on how griefsense shows up in your life. And if you have a story that you'd like to share with us, please feel free to reach out. You can reach us at info@griefsense.com via email. Now with that, hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Welcome back, listeners of griefsense. We have another episode in store for you today. I have the pleasure of having Adriana Michelle as my guest. You may also know her as the Death Alchemist on social media. And I am just so excited for our conversation. And as you know, on griefsense, we get real deep, y'all. We talk about all the things that are related to death, grief, and everything that comes with that. But we do it in a way that's creative and kind of fun, and just normalize that this is everything that we experience and go through as humans. So real quick, I just want to talk about how I got introduced to Adriana, or to Adriana. And y'all, and you probably don't know this, Adriana, but you are one of my favorite content creators. And when I first got into my, I guess, content creator journey around, talking about death and grief and loss, I thought I was crazy because I didn't know anyone in my inner circle, or anyone in my life for that matter, that was talking about this. And I felt like I was screaming internally because I didn't have the resources or the community I needed to talk about these things with. And then one day I did an Instagram search. I'm like, oh, I put in death, or like in the search bar, and your name popped up. And I was just like, what? Like, I was literally my earth shattering, life changing game changer for me, because you really validated that my experiences are real and they deserve to be honored and amplified, and that there's community that needs to be built around everything that you and I are passionate about. So I just want to thank you for being part of my life now, but also inspiring me, and for being on the show. So, yes.
Thank you.
It's not every day where you have one of your favorite content creators on your show. So I just wanted to just publicly thank you for that. And yeah, so feel free to introduce yourself and tell the people who the lovely Death Alchemist is.
Oh my gosh, Mimi. Thank you for that introduction. You're so sweet. It's an honor. So yes, hi everyone. First off, my name is Adriana Michelle. As Mimi said, I go by the Death Alchemist over on Instagram. I am a death doula, a storyteller, an alchemist, a bruja. I have many, many, many titles. But the overarching theme, I guess you could say, of my work and just who I am publicly and privately is I'm someone who wants to not just normalize, death and grief conversations, but really deeply explore them and transform the way people relate to their own grief story. One of the biggest things that I really enjoy doing, and I do this through film, sharing films on my Instagram, is allowing people to, like I said, explore their relationship with death and realize that it's more than just physical loss as well. I really do think that death and grief are both characters in our lives that we should have relations with and to. And yeah, that's a little nugget of what I do and who I am.
Wow. Yeah. Well, there you have it, folks. Can you tell that this is going to be an amazing episode? It's just going to be deep. It's going to be really insightful. And, I'm just grateful for you for being here. So in natural griefsense fashion, at the beginning of every episode, we like to hold space to honor people who have died in our lives. And I would like to give you the opportunity. Who would you like to honor today?
My abuelita, my grandmother, Fernanda. She raised me. She's been on my mind a lot this week as I'm starting to finally write my book. She is,
Hmm.
she's definitely there guiding everything and just reminding me to trust myself. So, and this is kind of scary, you know. I think I might seem like I'm like, oh, everything's cool, but it is a little unnerving to be on camera and on the mic and just sharing something that means so much to me and being vulnerable.
Mm.
So, yeah, I want to honor her because she was the best. She was
Mm.
everything. She is everything. So,
Yes, she is everything. I love that. Well, I also want to join you in honoring your abuelita and can't wait to learn more about her and her influence on your life. And just also wanted to amplify something you just said about it's not easy, right? Being on camera and speaking publicly and so vulnerably about something so deep and personal. And I think it's just really important to normalize the fact that I'm definitely not a certified mental health professional. However, we all do experience really tough challenges in life, and we all are influenced differently by these obstacles that we have to navigate. But I've always just been particularly inspired and interested in people who have gone through really tough moments, but are trying to make sense of it, right,
mhm.
through really unique ways. And I just also really want to say, like, we are human. It's okay to be human and to just
Mhm.
be. That is our purpose in life, right? Not everyone needs, we don't need to have this grand purpose of life. And I think that's just really normalized from capitalism. It's like, oh, you need to have meaning and you need to have purpose.
Mhm.
Um, However, I do feel that when you do experience something like loss, I feel like you naturally have some purpose that's born out of that. And I don't know, I don't want to speak for you, but that has been a common pattern that I have seen and observed with people who have experienced loss. So just also wanted to say that as well.
Yeah. I love that. As you were speaking, I heard, yeah, I'm not a professional griever. It's not going to always look perfect. I'm
Right,
authentic. I think that's kind of the purpose that I bring back in
right.
2020 when all of this kind of started. I was like, people just want to be witnessed. That's kind of the message that came through when all of this when it first started publicly for me, I'd say. I was like, "Oh
Mm,
yeah, people just want to be witnessed. I want to be witnessed even through
mm,
the uncomfortableness and the ickiness that comes with being vulnerable too, the
yeah,
judgment, the shame that we sometimes put on ourselves."
yeah.
Um, yeah, so it's just about being authentic. It's about showing up for
Mhm,
yourself. I really think it allows other people to see that it's okay. And like you said,
mm,
like a validation of sorts, I think that's what
yeah,
happens. It's like a ripple effect. Just one step,
yeah.
you know? Doesn't have to be this grand thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And the community that comes from just being that vulnerable voice, right? Like
Yes.
just being authentically you, you naturally inspire people that might not have the courage to let you know, like, hey, you inspire me. I consider you a really big part of my community. But it just goes to show that you never know who you're impacting when you share your story. And so that's what I love just about you and just who you are authentically. Like that's just the vibe that I got from you. And I was like, yes, we are part of each other's community now. You stuck with me,
hell
girl. I hope you know.
hell yeah. Hell yeah. I love that. And it makes me think of my friend Scout who she has a podcast with her sister called Okay
mm,
Sis.
mm.
And she
Writing
always
it down.
talks about how you never know who's listening. You never
Mm,
know who's listening. And that's like on a professional front, like you don't know who's listening. It could be some big person like at CBS or
true.
NBC who's like, Mimi, I want to give you a show, you know? And it
Let's
also
claim
could,
it. Let's
yeah,
manifest it. No, sir.
let's claim it. And it could also just be someone who's like at the end of their rope, who's like, I
hmm.
don't, you know, not to get dark, but here we go. Like, I don't want to live anymore. This is too
Yeah.
painful. And they hear you,
Yeah.
you go on live, they see a post that you share, and they're like, wow, someone sees
Yeah.
me, you know? That's everything. We don't know. We have very little idea of our impact. We
Yeah.
we really don't. But if you think about it, like something as simple as like road rage, you know, like we impact people just by like driving around people in a good
Yeah.
and bad way is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
So we
And
shouldn't take
energy
it
is
lightly.
contagious. Yeah,
Hell yeah.
absolutely.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is. Yes, it is.
Whew, all right, y'all, buckle up. I'm buckling up. This is gonna be good. Definitely on a more, serious note, I definitely want to allow you the opportunity to share your grief story, as little or as much as you'd like to share with the people, and also want to pull out what something you just acknowledged too. Like, folks might be really struggling right now and just need that extra umph to help them get through. And I also want to acknowledge September is Suicide Awareness Month. And as someone who has lost several people to suicide, that's ever present in my mind. That
Yeah.
it's like, you never know the battles people are fighting. And it's like, just really every interaction, like, honestly, okay, yes, you always hear the thing, it costs nothing to be a nice person. It
Mhm.
also costs nothing to be an asshole. But like, why would you choose that life? You know what I'm saying? Like, why would you choose to be that way? You never know what someone is going through. So as much as you can share, right, and be authentically you and everything, also, can we just be a little bit more, or can we just be kinder? Okay, like, can we just
Right.
normalize kindness and compassion and like empathy for like, this world is hard, y'all. This life is hard. So
It's hard enough. That's something I hear a lot. It's hard
yeah.
enough. But yeah, sometimes you just don't know the things that people are going through. Those people who are assholes. Oof.
Right.
I have compassion because I'm like, why are you acting like this? Oh, right.
Mm, something deeper is going on. Mm,
Something's going on and I'm sorry. Eesh, you know. You do what you can though. It's a balance. It's a dance
yeah.
really. Yeah, so my grief story. Oh. So, the timing of this is actually like it's not lost on me. Because as I
Mm,
mentioned before we started recording, I'm finally starting my book, and it's essentially about my life. It's my life story. It's my ancestral story. It is everything, as much as I can include,
mm,
that has made me who I am. The trials and tribulations, the joy, the passion, all of it. And so to begin, it actually does start with suicide.
mm,
My biological father actually attempted suicide. I was in diapers. I think I was probably like less than a year old, and it's
mm.
something that I'm definitely going to go deeper into in the book. But
Right.
that's really where my grief story starts, even though I don't remember it. The body remembers. I was definitely in the house when all of this went down.
Mm,
My parents separated. Um, I'm like a border baby. So I was born in San Diego, California. But after their separation, my mom was like, all right, I don't think that I can do this alone. So my mom asked my abuela, my abuelita
mm,
Fernanda, to take care of me in Mexico. So I essentially lived in Mexicali, which is Baja California, for the first like 6, 7 years of my life. I did preschool there. All of my
wow.
memories are there. And so, as you can imagine, that's another layer of grief, really. And it's one layer that I've only just started to unpack in the last few
Mm,
years during the pandemic, right? It was like, oh shit, like all of
you're
this is
forced to.
happening. Yeah, I was forced to. I was like, okay, maybe I was affected more than I'd like to believe, just because I don't remember it, right? Wasn't raised by my parents. It was, as wonderful as it was, all of the beautiful memories I have with my abuelita and with my extended family and like, my cousins and all of that. It's still, there was grief there. I didn't have my parents.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, the grief story just really evolved from there, coming back to the States and again, operating as a border baby and feeling like, I went to Catholic school for 8 years, predominantly white school, and
Mm,
did that, didn't really feel connected or, embraced by people, but then spending every single summer in Mexico. So it was a lot of just not really knowing who I was, not feeling
mm,
like I fit in. Um, Pushing down a lot of stuff, but the thing that really helped me, as you know from looking at my Instagram, was like film. It was art, it was storytelling, it was all of that, like real stories, like My Girl, that was like my movie growing
mm.
up. and also just fantastical, spooky stories and things like that. So
Mm.
the grief story just continues to evolve is what I'm feeling. But
Yeah.
I will say that I'm on the other side of like the darkness of it, I guess you could say. Just a lot of really really tough things have happened in the last few years, but
Yeah.
it has been an initiation of sorts. And not everyone will agree, but something else that I've discovered on in my grief journey is like I refuse to be a victim of my circumstances. Um, Everyone goes through stuff, and that's not to minimize anyone in any way. I don't agree with toxic positivity or thinking like, well, it could be worse, or at
Mm-hmm.
least this, at least that. I just think for me, it's been empowering to claim all of my ancestors were survivors. That's why I'm
Mm.
here. And there's a lot of stuff that they were not allowed to process. And that's what the book is about because here I am and I'm processing all of it and I want to share it to just show people that they can get through anything. You can get through
Mm.
anything, I promise you. Um,
Mm.
yeah.
Wow. Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. And I just want to thank you for sharing, because I do just want to honor, like it's not easy, right? To share these experiences. And I love what you said about initiation, because I actually say that all the time. Like we all have different initiations into this world that we did not ask to be in, but
Yeah,
we're here.
for real.
And it's like we're hazed by life experiences like grief, and it's like literally everything that you would experience in a gang initiation. That's kind of what it feels like.
For real.
um
Yeah.
but with that, it's yeah, I'm just really trying to, there's so many things I'd love to pull out of what you said. um but definitely the layer of how you resorted to film and just kind of like a
Mm-hmm.
creative outlet, because it's interesting, right? Like there are so many films that touch upon like grief and loss, but it's like only things we would see in movies. I think growing up, it would be things that we wouldn't necessarily talk about at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting you said My Girl, because I actually remember my mom, she would always have Ghost playing
Oh,
with, was it
love that
Mandy
movie.
Moore and Patrick Swayze. And
Mm-hmm.
naturally, I think it just became one of my favorite movies.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom loved it so much, I think, just because it was really relatable to her story, except it was kind of reversed, where like my mom survived and her partner, my father, passed away.
Yeah.
Um, and I just remember that movie really shaping who I was growing up,
Yeah.
as well as Sixth Sense. Those two movies, Sixth Sense and Ghost,
Mm-hmm.
those movies really impacted me growing up,
Mm-hmm.
and also similar to kind of shaped how I viewed grief, how I kind of, yeah, those is just very interesting because I haven't met anyone else who who relates to that. So it's just really unique that you shared that as well. But can you talk about that a little bit more? Like, what are some ways that film or just like the arts in general has impacted you, and like how has that guided you to where you are today, and even with you writing your book, like congratulations, that's huge.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, so I think film, first and foremost, I think it started out, I'm an only child. So when I came back to the States and learned English and all of that, yeah, my mom got me this like My Girl tape. And I think it was a means to escape, but it was like twofold. Like I was escaping into this world that was not my own, and yet I was feeling validated and I was curious, and I was able to explore certain things like in that film, the loss of a parent, um, just what it's like to be, even though it's set in like the 60s, like what is it like to be a kid? So there's the childhood
Mm,
component, and having a step parent come in, which is exactly what happened. I moved back to the States and then my mom remarried. Like she was dating a little bit and then she quickly remarried my stepfather who just died
mm,
last year. So I
mm,
think it was that. It was that. those two things. And just as you were speaking about Ghost and the Sixth Sense, I mean, that's why I also teach a class. I'm teaching a class
Mm.
right now, exploring death and grief via cinema, because
Mm.
it doesn't just validate our experiences. I think it's a really good way for us to explore the experiences of others. So if you are not familiar with XYZ, you can, watch a film and maybe understand society, humanity, just a
Right.
complete stranger a little easier. And again, just the timing is so interesting because, as you mentioned, September is Suicide Awareness Month. And the last film that we watched in the class was What Dreams May Come. And
Mm.
I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a film from the 90s starring Robin Williams. And the themes that are explored in that film are
Robin Williams. Well, that's another. Whoa.
so, oh, yeah,
Woo.
right. Exactly. Which is another thing, like when you watch it
Woo.
back now, you're like, oh, like that's a theme in the film. There's child loss, there's suicide, there's
Right.
grappling with the afterlife. Just films really allow us to explore things that we wouldn't normally explore. That's it.
Right.
Because if you were to sit in front of someone and say, hey, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about child loss, suicide, the afterlife, uh,
Mm.
punishment, all of that, religion, all of that, people would be like, hell no. Like, that is
Mm-hmm.
way too much. And yet,
Yeah.
that's exactly what we did last week. We had a
Wow.
conversation, we watched the film, we had more discussions. And I wish that for everyone. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be this contrived, cold conversation when we talk about death and grief.
Right.
It can be beautiful, it can be expansive, it can really connect you to other people.
Mm.
And I just love it. I,
Oh
you
my
know,
goodness.
I love it so much.
Wow. It's just so awesome, and I know there's going to be a lot of people that can resonate with what you're sharing, because like there is almost that natural validation when you do watch movies and film. And I will say, like, I've always loved these things, but then as I got older, I also started noticing just like the gap with Black and Latino representation in film
Yes.
and media, and that's honestly what inspired me to get involved in it too. um, just to really amplify our stories. Like, yes, everyone is impacted by grief and loss, like no matter what you look like. But I do also think that there's nuances and intersections that need to be acknowledged based on how you identify and how communities identify and how communities are impacted. Another film that honestly transformed my whole perspective on everything was 7 Pounds with Will Smith. That is definitely one of my
Mm,
favorite movies in the entire world, because it's like, it's so deep. It acknowledges loss, it acknowledges sacrifice, it acknowledges community care, and really like sacrificing yourself and your needs to
yeah.
better support your community and
Yeah.
people who need it. And there was just so many different layers of that movie that really, really, really changed my life. And it really impacted how I kind of view certain things, how I value my interactions with people.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, for the listeners out there, if you're listening to this, please like let us know some films that have impacted you. I think we'd both love to know, right?
Yeah.
And like as we're having this conversation, like what are some movies, some films, some videos that have greatly influenced your life? And Adriana, how about your abuelita? Like, how has her influence, or how has growing up with her impacted your life, and maybe what you chose to do as a career, how you show up as a woman, as a person, as a lover, as a friend, right? How has her life impacted you? Which I know could be a loaded question. So,
Yeah. It is. Oh my God. No, I'm just kidding. Um, she was just, I mean, she was the matriarch. Like my
Mm.
mother, she was a guerrera, she was a warrior. She was just so, and I don't love this trope of like she was so strong, but she really, really, really was. And I think growing up with someone like that, and witnessing my mom as well, battling breast cancer for years,
Mm.
um, I think it taught me that I didn't have to be strong. It
Mm.
taught me that I was I was allowed to fall apart. I didn't have to have all the answers. It was safe for me to share the secrets of within the family, you know, the secrets that I've kept inside myself, that some of them I haven't even told my therapist. I'm like writing about them. They're on like, basically I have sticky notes on the wall where I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to
They're
have to
gonna be
write
like,
about
I
this.
didn't see that in our sessions.
Right? Oh my God. So I think that's so funny. I'm like, oh gosh, maybe she's listening to this. I'm so sorry. There's some things, right? Los secretos, like you just,
Yeah.
you know, there's things where like growing up, I would
I know.
always, people, you know, things are just not shared. There's always secrets. There's a lot of like sexism going on. And I think I just witnessing both of them, but especially my abuelita, like she raised her kid. There was a lot of abandonment too. I think that's a huge one. And that's a big theme that is in the book that I'm writing. It's like at the core of everything, it is abandonment, and it is feeling um, abandoned by like your partner, by like, you know, someone, a man that you're married to, and then feeling abandoned by your kids. And then suddenly you're abandoning yourself, or you realize that you have abandoned yourself your whole life. So I think that's the biggest thing is like,
Wow.
I witnessed them sacrifice what you were talking about, sacrifice. I witnessed them sacrifice so much. And now all of my family, like, you know, the core unit, my mom, my stepfather, I don't talk to my biological father. I met him once in 2018. All of those people are gone now, and it's like you got to live for yourself. What do you want to do, you know?
Right.
You can't repeat that. You don't want to. Like we don't want you to. So I think that's probably the biggest lesson is like sacrificing, do not abandon yourself. You don't have to be so strong all the time.
Wow.
It's okay to go to therapy. Like please go to therapy, you know, like oh my god, we should have gone to therapy or something, you know, something should have happened. And there's also the spiritual component as well, just growing up in Mexicali and going to church with her, but it was just a different vibe. I don't know how to explain it because when I moved to the States and entered Catholic school, I was like, no,
Like, this
this is
ain't it.
this is not what I'm used to. This feels weird. I don't know. Also, I was just thinking how there was always this like acknowledgement of our indigeneity. My abuela, I remember the first time I got really hurt. All these fire ants bit my legs like all over. And it was my fault. She told me, she's like, stay off, you know, don't get on the grass. And I just remember she grabbed me and she just like soothed me with the sana sana colita de rana. And then she grabbed this bottle,
Yep.
and I still remember it. It was a big glass bottle filled with all these herbs, and it was this brown liquid. And she poured it all over this cloth and just like rubbed it all over my legs, and it was instant relief. So I think there's that component too, where I was like, we're going to
Yeah.
Catholic church, but like something's different. Like where this is different. So
Yeah.
yeah, she's influenced so much of me, you know, reconnecting to that as well and being like, oh yeah, our family's from Jalisco and we're most likely from the Huichol, you know, group. And I need to know way more, but I think it's cool that in the last 3 or 4 years I'm getting closer to understanding and to even just acknowledging, you know, these are our roots. So there's just
Right.
so much there. I know there's like a lot of layers there, but
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. And I definitely want to acknowledge the fact that, yeah, like there's so many layers to this. And I think also having family roots in another country while also then growing up in the United States, like that is a whole nother layer that a lot of folks don't understand. That, you know, a lot of people here in the US are intentionally, honestly, by design, because of just
mm-hmm.
colonialism and all the
Mm-hmm.
things, we're taken away from our roots, you know, like, and I just think it's so beautiful that she has had such a strong influence on you to kind of inspire you to reconnect with that. That's so beautiful. And I really am excited to see and hear how you continue to explore on that journey, because, and I think it's a reminder for all of us, like even people who were born in the US and only know US and don't know what it's like to live in another country. We're all of our families are immigrants from the
Yes,
US.
everyone,
Everybody,
every
every
single
single
person.
person. So it's like, I just think it's really beautiful when you do try to reconnect with your roots. And a lot of what you would find, especially as someone who might identify as Black, Latino, Indigenous, so on and so forth, there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of resilient stories. There's a lot of just overcoming resilience in
Yeah.
our stories. And it's tough, right? But I also think that's the beauty of it all, right? Like we come from
Yes.
such powerful roots and familial connections that
Mm-hmm.
we haven't even began to touch the surface
For
of
real.
what we know. And
Mm-hmm.
I often say, right, and it's I think a known fact, right? We only use a certain percentage of our brains, right? And we also only know a small percentage of our ancestral backgrounds. So I really love that you've been on this journey and you're talking about it, you're reflecting it, you're normalizing it. And yeah, I just really hope people tuning into the episode, go tap into your roots, y'all.
Yes. And honestly, the best way to do it, it's something I want to talk about, maybe do a workshop on,
Yeah.
is through our ancestral foods. Straight up. And the thing
Mm,
is, too, people don't realize, I think the reason why people are death phobic is because of the disconnection from
yeah.
our roots. Because think
Boom.
about it. If you had that ancestral connection, you would have all of these rites, all of these ways
Yeah.
to celebrate our
Mhm.
dead. It's not all doom and gloom as Western civilization wants us to believe. I mean, Dia de los Muertos, like, I'm so grateful. I'm so,
Yeah.
so, so grateful because it was never, and nods to my abuela as well. Like, I was never afraid. Like, she straight up would tell me, me voy a morir un día. And I'd be like, what? And she'd be like,
Wow.
I'm going to die one day. And then I was like, oh, okay. And we would talk
Yeah.
about, watching My Girl, I think was an influence. Like, I wanted to do her makeup. I wanted to do her makeup when she died. Like, that was a thing as a kid I would talk about, which is so
Yeah.
funny and random and, like, honestly kind of beautiful too. But going back to the ancestral foods, that's such a
Mhm.
easy way to do it. It's so
Yeah.
easy. I do want to say it's a little bit
Yeah.
harder if you are adopted. That's a whole other
That's a whole
ball
nother
game. I
layer.
want to just
Hmm.
speak to that. But if you know, if you know a little bit, just do a little digging, Google search. Hello. It's
Right.
just try a little bit. Um, you never know what you could
Yeah.
find out. That's all I'm saying.
And you'd be surprised how many of our foods and traditions are inspired by Africa,
Oh
right?
yeah,
So,
so many of them.
yeah.
Yep,
So, yeah,
it's
and
true.
your abuelita reminds me of she's my great great grandmother. She died a few years ago. Her name was
Mm.
Margarita.
Mm.
Or we called her Abuela Margot for short. And that was my mom's like favorite person on the entire planet. She
Oh.
was tough, y'all. Like she was tough. But she always had a remedy for everything. For everything. She had a remedy for every single thing. And it's just like, really, well, I like, what is this? And like, I was a lot younger, so in a lot of the things that, my mom would tell me about her, I didn't really understand until I
Mhm.
got older,
Mhm.
and it was so wild just like kind of talking about just the connection to food, because she actually died around Thanksgiving. I don't know. I think it's like hace como 6 o 7 años, no sé. I guess a little 6 or 7 years ago now.
Mhm.
And it's just wild because she, her food and her traditions, like she just had such a great impact on our family. And she was
Yeah.
also the matriarch as well. So,
I love that
um,
so much.
yeah. And it's
It's
it's just interesting though, right? Because like after the matriarch dies, it's up to the next generations to keep those traditions going, but it's not
Mhm.
normalized for that to happen, and it doesn't happen in a lot of families. And it's just like so much kind of like bringing in my work with like consulting and like organizational development. Like when you're in the workplace, you need to naturally have a succession plan to track that institutional knowledge, right? When someone quits or someone passes away or something happens, right? You need to
Right.
document that information. It's the same thing for families. It's like that institutional knowledge, that ancestral familial connection is sometimes the only thing we have.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just making me kind of think about that a little bit more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Because I mean, isn't that wild that we do that for business? It's just obviously you have to have someone to step in
Some
afterwards.
businesses don't, and they're failing, but that's a conversation for another
But
day.
with families, oh, there's so much I
Yeah.
could say about that. Like, oh,
Yeah.
recipes. My abuela hand wrote all of her recipes, but when she had a
Amazing.
stroke, I was in high school. She had a
Mm.
stroke. It was time to sell her house, which is fine, okay. But my uncle sold the house with everything in it, including all of the recetas, all of the handwritten
Oh my
recipes,
gosh.
baby clothes, the china,
My
all of
heart.
the plates and everything. Oh, I know. I think after that, anyway, it's going to be in the book. After that,
Read the book.
my mom was not happy about it, which I get. And it was hard for us because
Mm.
everyone else is in Mexico. My mom is she was the only one who immigrated.
Wow.
So it was just tough because she was like, had a lot of guilt, but she wasn't there
Mm.
to really have any
Yeah.
hand in it. But I remember we were like, I didn't really know, like you said, when you're a kid, there's things that you miss. And then when you get older, you're like, yeah,
Right.
I'm pissed. Like, how could you do that? Like, what is wrong with you? But
Exactly. Yeah.
anyway, people do
Well,
things,
and then exactly. And even that, they're like that's why I'm saying like grief always has so many different layers. And I talk about this frequently too, but like there's the primary loss, right? Which is like the physical
Mhm.
loss. But then there's all the secondary losses that come with that. And I
Yes.
think that one of those is like the grief that comes with that estate planning or like after someone dies, like
Mhm.
who gets what, and like you'll have relationships that have been estranged or just strained over the last few years, and then now they're forced to like connect, or they don't because they're so petty and they're not willing to put their problems aside, and it's like,
Yep.
and it just causes so much more grief and pain and despair when it comes to that. And I see that in all family backgrounds, no matter what they look like. It's
Yeah.
tough.
The estrangement and the strain and yeah, and I mean, you also speaking of secondary loss, even though I think it should be considered a primary loss, is you lose the person physically. Even though I always feel like I've always felt this that like they're never gone. Physically, you
Right.
have to
Physically.
yeah, physically you have to kind of get used to the fact that they're not there. Even if you have an altar set up, even if you dream with them, even if all the things. The other loss is like you are not going to be the person that you were
Mm,
because that person's gone. So
absolutely.
the you that they knew is also kind of dead in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
hard too. It's definitely
Mm.
difficult, but
And I definitely want to amplify that quickly because, especially with grief sense, like a big part of that is confronting your mortality, right? And a lot of us
Mhm.
don't have to confront our mortality until we're forced to. And I think a
Right.
lot of people weren't forced to confront it until the pandemic happened, right?
Mhm.
And I obviously there's so much pain and triggers that come up with talking about the pandemic, but I also think there's a lot of good that came out of it as well, in the sense of like there was like this collective conscious or like this collective awakening of folks that were forced to confront their mortality, and it just really put things into perspective. Like, dude, like, is this the job that I want to be doing? Are the habits that I'm doing right now, are they toxic? Are they serving me? Is this relationship I'm in serving me? Like, I just think it put everything into perspective for so many people globally.
Yes.
And there was like this collective, I don't know, momentum to just inspire people to look at their lives differently. And that's something that's really big with grief sense, or how I define grief sense too,
Mhm.
because like you said, right, like every time someone dies, the way like the life as you know it, as you said, is dead. And you have to kind of look at and reinvent what life is going to look like now, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how do you reimagine something that doesn't exist? And then to amplify that, and I definitely want to ask you this as well, because, and I don't know if this is like a word, but serial grievers out here who have experienced multiple losses,
Yeah.
you have to confront your mortality in so many more ways than
Yes.
other people have to. And I just think it hits different when
Mm-hmm.
you see people that are essentially these serial grievers, but are still like, nah, man, I have my clarity. I have my purpose in life. I know what I want to do. And still so, and like you said, I don't like the whole toxic positivity, definitely not. But still somehow balance being an optimist with like realism and things like that. And just really seeking the good and living presently
Mm-hmm.
amidst all of this pain. So I definitely want to get your thoughts on that, right? Like being someone who has experienced multiple primary losses, but then all of the secondary losses that come with that, and then having to kind of confront your mortality so many times.
Right. The word that's coming through is it doesn't just make you brave, like having those initiations over and over and over again. It kind of makes you feel, at least my experience, it made me feel like no one could fuck with me. Like it made me like I was on the other side of the spectrum. Like I didn't feel mortal. Like it wasn't highlighting my mortality. It was highlighting like the other side, which is like I
Mm,
don't like how do I really feel about death? Like what is my relationship to it? How do I want to live a
right.
full life now? But also knowing just feeling it through all of these initiations, knowing very, very well for myself again that like this isn't the end, you know? So I think there's a sense of peace that comes with it too, is
Mm,
like I've already experienced the most pain I feel like that I could experience. And probably shouldn't say that too loud.
yeah.
Um,
Knock on wood.
knock on wood, that I feel unfuckwithable. I think that's the word. I feel
Love it. Yep.
unfuckwithable. Um,
Love it.
what we were talking about before we started recording, that my ex best friend's birthday was last Thursday or
Mm,
Friday. I had to end a relationship of like 2 decades a year
mm,
ago because of some like, I'll just say it, racism.
mm,
Not just like general racism, it was like directed at me. So I was like, all right,
mm.
like I should have done this a long time
This is what we're
ago.
not
But
going to do.
anyway,
Mm-hmm.
yes, no accountability. And I think that's also testament to all of the initiations that I went through. Like I've already
Mm,
lost my parents. I don't have a relationship with my biological father. I've experienced so much loss.
yeah.
Again, losing myself, abandoning myself, that I refused. I had a moment where I was like, okay, this is done. A friendship of 2 decades.
Mm,
I'm okay. I will not this will not end me. This will not kill me. I
mm,
think staying in it, in connections, in relationships, in jobs, not allowing yourself to change just as you as a person, also because I'm all about personal deaths that we go through and the rebirths that we are being asked to step into that we sometimes refuse to do. I think all
absolutely.
of this has allowed me to just say yes, step forward and be like, yeah, I'm gonna do this. Like it would be a slow
Mm,
death to not,
mm.
so
Whew.
I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it did. And again, it's just like validation on top of validation, right? And I'm just so grateful for everything you just shared. And I relate so heavily to it. And I also want to put that back on our folks tuning in. Like, y'all, have you experienced moments where you felt like invincible because you felt that you already faced the worst, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of like, how can it get worse than this, right? And it's like it can. There's storms ahead, right? There's
Mhm.
always going to be some tough battles that we have to fight ahead, but there's also going to be some really good moments. And it's
Mhm.
like you being in charge of how you want your life to go, right? Being the director of your own movie, of your own life.
Yes.
It's like I call the shots. I decide who's in my life and who's not, right? Like it just adds this, yeah, just being invincible, just feeling like you're unstoppable. And I totally relate to that. And that was actually me last year. I hit a moment where I was like, you know what? I done been through some things in my life that at this point, it doesn't matter. And like, what does it all matter anyway? Right? Like in
Mhm.
a year, in 5 years, in 10 years, if we're still here. So last year, I went through some things where all of what we're talking about was put into perspective for me. And it was brewing for many years because, similar to you, I've had to kind of, confront my mortality many times. And I felt like if I already went through this, like, y'all, this is nothing. Okay.
Mhm.
And so I was dealing with a lot of workplace trauma at the time. I mean, everything that you think can happen in the workplace, it happened, whether that was directly through me or people that I was close to in the environment. And it just became a place that was no longer serving me.
Mhm.
Um, and it just felt like I was this beautiful flower, right, that was in toxic soil. And I just really
Mhm.
needed to replant myself. And also just kind of writing off the momentum of the pandemic, right? You talk about the great resignation, and these things are becoming more normalized where people are just really reconsidering the things in their life, and just trying to live life with more intention and more clarity. And yeah, and I was like, I think I'm gonna quit my job, man. Like, I think I'm gonna quit my job. And it would be against all odds, right? It would be against everyone's opinions. But it got to the point where it's like, I don't give a, I don't give a shit
Mhm.
about other people's opinions right now. Like, this is my life. I've been through so much. I know that I'm gonna bounce back from this. I've bounced back from so many other things before. I'm gonna do it again. Watch me.
Yes. Yes.
and and I quit my job, and like it was such a big deal because no one in my family, I'm the first in my family to graduate high school. So like, let alone being first generation in the workplace and then you quit your job, like that's just unheard of. And
Right.
I felt a lot of guilt. I felt a lot of guilt. I felt a lot of shame. I felt all of the things. But I was like, you know what? I got this. Everything's gonna work out for me. Everything always works out for me. And I did. And so I've kind of been on this journey, right? Entrepreneurship is not easy. I'm
No,
definitely
no, no.
thugging through these entrepreneurial streets, y'all. But like, life hits different when you're
Mhm.
moving with intention, and when you're moving with love for yourself and love for your community. And like, yeah, that's all I need to get through. Like, I really do feel like I have my ancestors and I have the people who have died in my life that have
Mhm.
carried me through really big, momentous, like, milestones in my life. And
Yep.
last thing I'll say really quick here is I got the amazing opportunity to be invited by President Obama himself to be a keynote speaker at his conference and a panelist with him on stage. When I was on stage for my keynote speech, right? And like the day before I had practiced, and I'm freaking out, like, oh my gosh, it was wild experience. But when it was the big day and I was on stage, got all these people watching. It's like 500,000 plus people watching, like virtually, because it was live streamed. I felt this like release and relief because I
Mhm.
felt that my voice, I felt like I had multiple voices coming out of my voice, if that makes sense. It
Oof.
makes sense in my head, but it
Yes.
felt like I literally had all my people with me that have died, like my spiritual army. It like, I felt it like right here in my chest, like I had this frog in my throat. It felt like right before I got on stage, and then as soon as it was my turn to go, it was removed, and I felt like I was floating. And I was like, I knew my father was with me. I know my best friend was with me. I know my Wella was with me, like all the people that I lost. And I was like, I like what you said, I felt unfuckwithable because I was like, bro, and I'm here with Obama?
Yeah.
Okay, we got this. We put it on for the city real quick, okay? Like, it just hits different. So,
You realize, I think, obviously there's the pain of losing people, but then you
of
also
course.
are like, "Oh, I'm not alone." Like, first of all, they're here. I'm never alone. I'm not alone, and they're with you.
Right,
Like, that made me
right.
emotional because
Thank you.
it's so real, it's so true, you know. Whatever
Yeah.
you shared, now I like want to know. I'm like, I'm going to go Google like what was Mimi talking about? Um it's not just our stories, you know. That's
Yeah.
the big thing, I think.
Yeah.
It's not just our
Absolutely.
stories, it's and I think they're
Yeah.
still affected by it too, like on a spiritual level.
Yes.
When we hurt, they hurt, you know.
Mm.
When we overcome things, they're also overcoming, they're elevating as ancestors. Like I believe all of
Whew.
that is very
Yep.
true. I've felt it and experienced it myself. So that's so
Same.
beautiful. So proud
Absolutely.
of you. That's amazing.
Thank you. Definitely one of the most life-changing moments.
Yeah.
And it happened during, so like the fall time is actually like really hard time because I've lost a lot of people around this time.
Yeah.
Specifically like Halloween and November 1st, which also happens to be, you know, around Dia de los Muertos and everything. So
Yeah.
just that time is wild. But like my best friend died on Halloween. And then a few years later, I had another friend who died a day after her, but it was like the same time. And it was the same time I was invited to speak at the conference with Obama. I was like, this is not by accident. And
No.
like I was carried here through my
Hmm.
people. Like I just felt it and I knew it. But but with that, I also do want to acknowledge like I'm someone who has experienced losses from several years ago and someone who has also experienced recent loss. And
Yeah.
so I know when a loss is really fresh, it's
Mm.
hard to conceptualize the things that we're kind of talking about and referring to because when a loss is super fresh, you're just so angry, you can't think about anything else, or however you internalize it, right? Like people
Yeah.
internalize it differently. But I know the pain when a loss freshly happens. And to even be able, I just want to acknowledge the growth in both of our journeys because being able to even talk about this in the way that we are talking about it is so, I don't have the word for it. It's just wow. It's an accomplishment I think in and of itself to even be able to reach this point. But I
Yeah.
think it's a testament of the resilience to never give up and to
Yeah.
keep going, to find these type of insights. But pulling out something you said earlier, just really like leaning in and surrendering to our ancestors and just surrendering to the love and the knowledge that even though our people aren't physically here anymore,
Hmm.
allowing yourself to explore what a relationship could look like on a spiritual level when
Yes.
they're not in the physical form.
Yeah. Well, first off, I just want to say that I think eventually, and not everyone has this experience, but it just becomes too much to carry.
Mm-hmm.
So just that acknowledgement, like when you're like, oh, it's a big deal, right? To be able to talk about it like this.
Right.
I think I can't imagine not.
Mm-hmm.
It was too heavy. It was too heavy to carry and to keep pretending. I think that's a huge thing that I just want to share to those out there who are grieving. Whatever you're grieving is stop pretending, you know?
Mm.
Acknowledge what you are feeling, even if you're not feeling it now. Maybe you felt it in the past. I just think it's so important to do that. I don't think I would be here alive without that. You know, last year when my stepfather died, I fully wanted to not be here. You know, I didn't want to be gone, but just the pain was so overwhelming and something
Mm.
that I thought about a lot and that maybe some people out there listening will relate to is that I wasn't asking like why me? You know, like some people are like why me? Why me when something bad
Right.
happens? Especially I think it was 2021 my cousin, he was like in his early 40s. He just died. Like he just was found in
Mm.
his bathroom and I remember thinking why him and not me? Like that was a thing I had and I
Mm.
think it's because I was is heavy. I was still kind of
That's
navigating
heavy.
like what am I doing here? Like why am I still here when he has a kid, he's married, he had a good job, he's the eldest of 3 kids. He was
Wow.
like, you know, the foundation for a lot of people within that family and then like just our bigger family, extended family.
Yeah.
I just I think it's an important question to ask, because I think, going back to what we were saying about like exploring our relationship with death and grief, it's like it helps you figure out what you are here for.
Mm,
Um, you
yes.
know, I don't think there is this grand, like, you need to be a multimillionaire and you need to do this and that and you need to prove yourself that you're worthy. But it's more so like, well, what are you here to do?
Mm,
What do you want to do? Like, what lifts you up? Maybe
yeah.
it's just you really care about the ocean, and you're like, I don't even really fuck with people. I just want to like clean our oceans. Okay, that is your
That's
mission. That's
beautiful.
beautiful. That's beautiful. And
Right.
I think that also is connected to our spiritual connection that we have with our ancestors, because we're not the first, I think, is another thing I want to share. we
Mm,
we
def-
always want to say that we are the first. I am the I'm breaking generational curses and all that. I agree. I have fallen into that trap of being like, I'm the first. We're not the first. We might not know those ancestors, but they exist. Maybe they're like 5, 10 generations back, but they also probably broke through
mm,
barriers and did things that were, not expected of them. And they did
mm,
it because they wanted better for themselves. They wanted to live a full, meaningful life.
mm.
And I would say that's another thing, going back to my abuela. That's another thing that I
Yeah.
really admired about her, that she married at 15 in Puebla
Mm.
in Mexico, and she had a kid, and she was married to like a governor or something. Like, I don't know, those details are missing a little bit. But she left. She could have stayed comfy. She could have stayed totally comfy there, and she didn't.
Wow.
She left, and she went to the border town of Mexicali, where my mom was born.
Wow.
And not everyone agrees with, what you're going to do in life, but you got to do what's right for you. That's
Mm.
it. And your
That's
ancestors
it.
are with you, and you're not alone. You're not the first. Sorry. You're not the
Yeah.
first.
Yeah.
Um yeah.
I think that's so powerful to say that, right? And there's so much that we don't know from our history.
Yep.
But I definitely think now, like, we may be the first to explore in this time, this
Yes.
day and time, right?
Yes.
But we don't know what's come before us. And
No.
so I think it's just really important to acknowledge that, because we are doing what we're doing in this moment in time, and we can and we do have this responsibility, whether we decide to take it on or not, to
Yep.
heal our lineage or
Yes.
to keep the same things going, right?
Yep.
And depending on the things that we decide to do today is definitely going to impact the future generation. And like, I'm always mindful of that.
Yeah.
And I think it's just another layer of grief that like a lot of people don't really talk about, or not grief, but like just experiencing loss, and like acknowledging that we're all going to die one day,
Hmm.
and we are going to become ancestors ourselves,
Yeah.
and hopefully the next generation has more connections. And I imagine they would, just because of the digital age and social media, and like record keeping these days is a lot
Right.
different from back in the day. So I feel like hopefully that is the case. But I do want to call out that we do have a responsibility, y'all. Like, are you going to take up the mission or not? You going to heal your lineage or not? Like, epigenetics is a real thing, y'all. Trauma
Yes.
is a
Yes.
real thing. Trauma affects DNA. Trauma affects the way we grow up and how we, and what we
Yeah.
decide to do with our lives. So this is, wow,
Yes.
this is so multi-layered. I think I'm going to have to, there's a lot. I'm going to have to journal and reflect on this episode, girl. Like, this is this is so good. This is
I'm
so
so
good.
glad. I love talking about this. I was nervous. Like, I was like, "Ooh, how am I going to handle this?" But you've made it so easy. You're a wonderful
Thank you.
host. It's
This is
not
the
easy
space
to,
for it.
yeah, and it's not easy to interview people. I don't think people realize that. Like, it takes a really, like, a good listener and someone who can like connect the dots and everything. But
Thank you.
yeah, going back to just the ancestors, I also want to share, and again, not everyone will agree, and that's cool.
That's all
Um,
right.
I think ancestors also, they're beyond our lineage and beyond blood. I
Mm.
think that there are ancestors, even like public figures that we connect to. Like, I have this Prince photograph right here. I've had dreams with Prince before, that he basically showed me that like reincarnation is real. So I
Wow.
consider him an ancestor, just a collective ancestor, even though we're not family, but we are like human family
Yeah.
if you think about it that way. Especially through music, I think like you reach a lot of people in a spiritual sense.
Oh, yeah.
So I just wanted to share that. And I think
Yeah.
you should pay attention. I think it's important, everyone listening, to pay attention to those artists and those people in just history from the past. Maybe they're not even alive now, that you feel something for. Like there's a reason
Mm.
for that. They might be part of, your
Your
spiritual
mission.
team, like you never
Yeah.
know. And I think it's important to, I don't know, just not be so
Yeah.
afraid or like shut things down because it seems like weird or off. And
Yeah.
I personally feel like we can learn a lot from everybody.
It's like lean
So
in, lean
lean
in to
in.
whatever messages that you're receiving. You're not getting those by accident. And like whatever visions you're getting, right? Like
Yeah.
entrepreneurs, visionaries, creatives,
Yeah.
musicians, filmmakers, anyone who is now currently experiencing the living manifestation of what was once an idea and what was once a
Yes.
concept, and then it became conceptualized. Like these are the things I've been reflecting on too, because this podcast has been an idea in my brain for the last few years, and now it's happening. And now I'm interviewing one of my favorite content creators. Like, what?
Oh
So
my
it's
God.
like these things, we don't receive these by accident. And it's just
I
like
don't think so.
lean
Yeah.
in, y'all, and just see what comes of that. And with the ancestor of even if being like public figures, like that's a big thing that we talk about in anti-racism and anti-oppression movements, right?
Yeah.
All of the ancestors, like we would not be here without Harriet Tubman. We would not be here without Bell Hooks. We would not be here without James Baldwin. Like there's
Yes.
so many people in the movement. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, like
Yep.
so many people in the movement. Shirley Chisholm, right? Like
Yes.
so many martyrs in the movement, and there's also so many people who never got their flowers in
I
activism
know.
and in civil rights that are also could be part of our spiritual teams and our spiritual mission or our assignments, right? And I just
I
think
just
that's
have to
really
say
important. Yeah.
Fred Hampton. His
Fred
his
Hampton.
name just came. He was like, say his name, Fred Hampton.
Fred Hampton. Yep. Absolutely. Um, so I'm just so happy that you said that, because, it's like where, if you think about this as a spiritual relay of sorts, right? We have an opportunity. And this is actually something that President Obama and I and other panelists with Yara Shahidi, like we talked about it on our panel. It's like we have these people that were before us. We stand on the
Mhm.
shoulders of our ancestors,
Yes.
and they're passing the baton to us. And we have a choice. We have a choice whether we want to carry that baton forward or are we going to let it drop, right?
Yep.
And it's not everyone's mission to
That's
do
true.
that, right?
That's true
But
too. Mm-hmm.
but I do feel that we all have a role to play, whether that's in activism, civil rights, human rights, right? In life in general, we all have a role to play that
Mm-hmm.
resonates with who we are and how we want to show up. And so I just think it's really important that we're having this conversation, right? To just really encourage and remind folks that, the things that you're receiving in your brain, you're not getting that by accident.
Yeah.
So,
Agreed.
but you mentioned that Prince visited you in your dreams. So I
Yes.
definitely want to know about that. But I also want to connect it with the creative prompt section that we do at the end of every Grief Sense episode. And this is just to really, and I think you and I definitely already do this naturally in our creative spaces, because I think we are creatives first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
But for the folks that may be just starting this journey or maybe just need some help kind of processing some of their thoughts around grief, I think prompts are a really great way to reflect on how to make sense of it all. And
Yeah.
creative prompts, especially, because it's like,
Mm-hmm.
how can we use the arts to make sense of something really hard that we're going through? And you do that so naturally throughout your content. So the prompts that you chose today is reflect on a dream where a loved one visited you and what you make of it. So yeah, feel free to answer.
Okay. So my mom
Or Prince.
died. So the prince one, I'll talk about it if we have time, but I'm going to talk
Yeah.
about the one that really, speaking of initiation, speaking of like a spiritual awakening, my mom died back in 2015. She had metastatic breast cancer. She was on palliative care and then transferred to hospice. And so she died in the home, which I'm just so grateful for, because she never taught me on it, but she just kind of was like, are you sure? You know, I'm an only child. I was like, yeah, like you are not, we're not, no. She died in the morning, and I remember, oh my gosh, it was raining. Like she died right
Mm.
before 10 a.m. And I remember there were like 10 crows on the roof, which I felt like, I was like,
Mm.
ooh, okay, like they're here to, I felt like just watch over her spirit. But that evening, I had a dream and I was in that house. I was in our home, but everything was foggy and the TV was on in the living room where her hospital bed still was. But the TV, and this is kind of connecting to film, the TV
Mm.
was like fuzzy. I don't know if you ever saw Poltergeist. So
Mm-hmm.
it was that sound of like static.
Mm.
And I was like looking, I was like, what's going on? And the easiest way to describe it is I felt like I was in this like in between. I was in
Mm.
between life and death. And I've had multiple dreams since then, that are very timely where that happens. They seem to come through like right before someone is about to die, or there's a sort of transition happening in my life. But so
Yeah.
anyway, that was happening. The TV was staticky in the dream, and I was like, Mom, like I was calling for her, and I heard not just her voice, but I heard my abuelita's voice from the TV, like
Wow.
inside the TV. And I was like, okay. And then I remember she said, Vete afuera, like go outside. And so I opened the front door, and it's like this white, like ranch style house. And I opened the front door, and it was super, super bright out, and everything just felt like sparkly. I don't know if that's the best way to describe it. And I started walking down the driveway and then started walking down the street because we were on a cul-de-sac. And I felt something in my hand, and I looked down, and it was a hummingbird. And the hummingbird wasn't
Mm.
just like sitting, it was like laid on my hand, and it was doing the thing that like cats do where it was like rubbing on my hand. It didn't say
Wow.
anything. It wasn't this like fantasy type of dream. It was just a normal hummingbird. But as I looked at it, I realized, I was like, this is my mom. Like it was just like an instant, I don't know how to explain it. It was like a telepathic just message of like, it's me. It's me.
Wow.
I am this hummingbird. And that was it. I woke up. It was a spiritual awakening and initiation of sorts. I felt so much peace
Mm.
and just that understanding of like, they're together again. I'm going to cry.
Mm.
They're together again. She's safe. And also, there is that ancestral component that I did not know at the time. My mom definitely had a connection with hummingbirds, but I had no
What?
idea. I had zero clue that this is like an ancient Mexican like symbol, you know, for the Aztecs and the Mayans and other indigenous groups that I believe it's
Wow.
the Mayans believe that hummingbirds are a symbol of life, which is
Mm.
so beautiful. And then also the Aztecs believed that is the god Huitzilopochtli is a hummingbird god, and that fallen warriors, so people, men, not people, men specifically who would die in war, you know, fallen warriors and women who died in childbirth would be reincarnated as hummingbirds. So
Wow.
when I read that, because my mom, we would always call her guerrera, and I saw that word warrior and I was like, there it is. I'm like, okay,
Wow.
she's she's okay. And I've told this story to many people, and it's just interesting because some people are like, oh well, if it makes you feel better, you know.
Yeah.
And oh, that's nice, you got a little closure, blah blah blah, like as if it's like a fantasy. But to me, there's just again the
Mm.
roots, the ancestral message. It wasn't just a dream, it was so
Right.
much more than that. And
Mm.
it has stayed with me since. And yeah, I'm so
Wow.
glad it happened that evening as well. Or yeah, that evening.
Because you said this was the evening before she
No,
died?
it was so she died in the morning, and that night I had that dream.
Oh, that night.
That night.
Oof.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. And that's, well, first off, thank you for sharing that. I think that dreams are one of those things that are also very deeply personal. And I think
Yes.
that I always feel like dreams are portals into other worlds or
Yes.
like just glimpses into other realms, if you will. But like,
They
I
are.
know that some of the things we're talking about, there will be listeners or people that are tuning
Mhm.
in that, might not relate to that. And that's completely okay. Like, I think everyone
Yeah.
has different experiences, but I definitely relate. And I just understand it so deeply with like
Yeah.
every cell in my body, as you were sharing, that is just shaking. And like, I can feel my cells replicating at like really fast rates because like, I'm like, bro, like, where has this person been all my life,
Aw.
um, but with that, I almost felt like as you were sharing your dream and when your mom, or as the hummingbird, right?
Yeah.
I almost felt like this was your mom's way of gonna be like, Mija, like you're gonna be okay. Like
Yeah.
I'm still with you.
Yes.
And like I also want to like pull out the fact that what a gift it is to have a loved one visit you in your dream, regardless of when you get it, but
Yeah.
how beautiful that it was the same day.
I know.
Like,
I
what a
know.
powerful connection. Like, whoa, I'm shook.
I
That's so
know.
beautiful.
Yeah.
That's really special.
Thank you. And yeah, I definitely agree with what you said about not everyone will relate. Some people don't, or they dream. Everyone dreams, but some people don't remember them. But I also just want to speak to the reality as well. Like I said, my abuela, my abuelita raised me. She was like my mom. So my mom and I had, we didn't have a perfect relationship. So I
Right.
also want to say that as well. Like it doesn't
Mm,
erase the reality of like who she was as a person, and she was human and she was imperfect and our relationship was imperfect as well. But it definitely did bring me, I felt closer to her. And that's another thing I want to say is that
mm,
not everyone will agree again, but so much healing has come with her death. Like I feel
mm,
closer to her now than I did
mm.
when she was living. And that
Wow.
might sound really odd to some people, but
Mm-mm.
there's just
That's so powerful.
there's things that I just never knew. There's places that we couldn't go while she was alive that we were able to
Mm,
access when she died.
mm.
So,
And what I think is so interesting too is like the older we get, whether a parent is alive or dead,
yeah.
because my I have a parent that's gone as well.
Yeah.
Um, it's like you learn to understand that like your parents are trying to figure out this adulting thing themselves and like have had a lot of traumas that they never dealt with, or just like life is freaking hard, right? And I just
Yeah.
feel like our parents are people just like us, but I think that
Yes.
there's this, I don't know, this idea, this thought that our parents are supposed to be these perfect people, these guiding lights that are supposed to help guide us through every single aspect of our lives. And while that should be the case, or ideally that would be the case, it's not always the case. And
Yeah.
we have to really look at this person as a person and holistically, and just really acknowledge that they aren't perfect, like you said, and
Yeah.
that to be able to do that, whether a person is alive or dead, a parent is alive or dead, I think it's a testament to the healing journey that you're on, to be
Mhm.
able to understand that, because sometimes a lot of those things are still, I mean, I'm sure they're still painful, and I'm sure there's a lot of things that are hard to visit and places that are just really hard to go to. But just being able to amplify and acknowledge the fact that our parents are people just like us, I think is something I'm trying to learn right now, and just show everyone grace. but also my parents, you know.
Yes.
And I think it's beautiful that you have kind of that close connection with your mom even after she's not here in the physical form. And yeah, that's just really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's important to
Yeah.
honor their humanity. They're not mom, dad, caregiver. They are, first, I think it's like their inner child. Now, reflecting back on my mom, and she was a kid, you know, like I feel like she was a kid raising a kid, children raising children.
That's
Um,
exactly. Yep.
you know, the movie Mermaids, we watched that in our class as well. And I don't know if you've seen it with Cher and Winona
Mm.
Ryder and Christina Ricci, but yeah, it's kind of a story of like a young mom, like a kid raising a kid. So I think
It's
that's
like Ginny and
important.
Georgia.
Yes,
You
it's
know?
important. Yeah, we got to humanize people. I think,
Yeah.
God, it's beyond just our parents. I think
Yeah.
it's also people we don't like, people who've done a lot
Mm.
of harm in
Oof.
the world. We really need to humanize them, because then I don't think we get full closure, because it's so easy to dismiss people as monsters
Mm.
versus we want to demonize people instead of being like, no, a human being was capable of doing XYZ.
I'm very
Yeah.
happy that you said that.
Yeah.
But Adriana, please, is there any, just messaging or anything you'd like to share with people as we wrap up here? Like just reflecting on our conversation today, like what's top of mind for you?
Oh my gosh. Gratitude. Gratitude for all of it, because I wouldn't be sitting here looking at your beautiful face and talking to you
Thank you.
about about all of these things. I have gratitude for grief. I have gratitude for death. I have gratitude for all of the things that I've been through, the experiences, whether they were difficult or not. There, it was all
Mm.
transformative, and it all brought me here. So, something that I really help people through. I've closed my one-on-one sessions for the rest of the year so I can focus on the book and other things, other work. But part of our ancestral healing and grieving, I don't want to say properly, but fully, wholly, is, to acknowledge grief and to acknowledge the
Mm.
humanity of people. This just happened, I just want to say, in a session with someone where their grandfather did some really awful stuff. And I
Mm.
was talking about honoring, I didn't know the details of it. They told me after the fact, and they were like, how am I supposed to honor this terrible person? And I was like,
Mm.
change that word then, maybe it's not honoring, maybe it's just acknowledging. I think that so much can be accomplished by
Mm.
acknowledging the things that we go through and the things that we witness, the things that we hide, the secrets that we've been keeping. And also having gratitude for, maybe not for the thing that happened, but
Mm.
for what is possible. You're alive. If you're listening to this, you are alive right now. You woke up.
Mm.
So,
Absolutely.
acknowledge the pain, acknowledge the grief, and then have gratitude that you get to still be here. And it
Mm.
can be small. It can be small. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. It can just be like, I have gratitude for this hot cup of coffee, the sunrise. I get to kiss my kid's cheek or whatever. I just read a
Yeah.
really great book or I watched a really amazing film. But I think those are the two words that are coming through for me right now. It's just
Mm.
acknowledgement and gratitude. And I
Mm.
understand that those are hard things to do, but that's what's coming
Yes.
through.
Thank you for sharing that. And, it's really important because there are people who have those stories where, people that have died in their lives did some really awful things, right? And I
Yeah.
think we can all relate to that in some way, shape, or form. And
Yep.
and I think it's important to pull out what you just said. Yeah, just to acknowledge it, right? And you make the decisions in your life. You decide how
Yep.
you want to move forward.
Yep.
But as you said, life is, like I always say this, life is a privilege, right? There's one of my favorite quotes is, if you have nothing else to be grateful for, check your pulse. So whenever
Oof.
I'm having a really tough moment in my life, I'm
You're
like, you know
like,
what?
yeah.
Literally, I do that. I count my pulse. I do it all the time. And I'm like, you
Yeah.
know what? I'm here. To feel these things means that I'm still alive. And if I get the opportunity to wake up tomorrow, I promise that I'm going to show up in love, and I'm going to show up in a way that I'm going to be proud of myself for in the
Yeah.
future, right? I'm not perfect. I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm going to love myself through it.
Yes.
Um, and I think that's just really important to say.
Love yourself through it. I love
Yeah,
that. I'm going to write it on the wall right now. Love yourself through it. Whatever it is, love yourself
right.
through it. Yes. I love
Yeah,
that.
because we're conditioned to self-sabotage, right? Like literally the default is to do self-deprecation and be like, oh, I'm so ugly. Oh my God, I hate myself. I am tonta. I'm so stupid. Like,
Yeah.
no. Love yourself through that, reframe this, and like just notice that, acknowledge the fact that we're all humans having a human
Mhm.
experience,
Yep.
and try to do better tomorrow, right? But love
Yep.
yourself through it. Love your people through it too.
Yes.
And then just, and like you said, gratitude. That's so beautiful. Um, but as we wrap up here, I definitely want to have folks who are not plugged in with you already to definitely be able to plug in with you. So where can they find you on the socials? How can they work with you? All of the things, shameless plug it all the way.
Thank you. Thank you. You can find me on Instagram at the Death Alchemist. As I mentioned, one-on-one sessions are on pause for the remainder of the year because I am doing a film class right now. But there's workshops coming. There's another film class next year that will be self-guided because the one I'm doing right now is it's live. But next year, a lot of stuff is coming. A lot of work I'm doing behind the scenes will be coming out in December and January. So I'm super excited. But yeah,
Mm,
for now, just come hang out with me at the Death Alchemist on Instagram. I would love to have you.
amazing. Oh, I forgot to ask you. So why the Death Alchemist? That'll be the last thing we
Oh,
talk about. But why the Death Alchemist? Why that name? Why now?
why? Okay. Um,
Why?
so back in 2020, I have to give you a little a little
Yeah.
context. But yeah, back in
Historia.
2020, I finally decided to go public with the spiritual work, readings that I was doing, grief sessions, things like that. And my name was Amor y Alquimia, which means love and alchemy. And then I realized that was just not everyone speaks Spanish. It's a little bit like broad. Even if I changed it to love and alchemy, people would be like, What are you doing? What are you about?"
What
And
that is.
yes, what are you talking about? And then I think I want to say I was working with someone. She's a witch. She's a marketing witch. Her name is I want to say it was Caitlin. It was Caitlin Matanley. I
Hmm.
remember we were in a meeting and I was telling her that I wanted to change the name. And I was like, I know I want it to say death. And then I remember she said, like, what do you think about death alchemy? And I was like, the death alchemist? And she looked at me and we both looked at each other. And I was like, that's it. And
Mm,
essentially, like what I said in the very beginning of our chat is I'm here to help people transform the relationship that they have to death. Because just because you are not thinking about it, just because you are ignoring it, in denial of it, etc., you still have a relationship to death. It is a
mm,
character within all of our lives, and that is what death and life and death alchemy is about, really. It's about transforming the way we see all of the things that fall under the umbrella of death, and it's pretty much
mm.
everything. So
Wow. First off, thank you for you, just for being you, for sharing your story, for all of the things. And I want to share something with you that, as someone who follows you, as someone who's inspired by you, right? I always felt that the name that you created, right, the Death Alchemist, is like this battle cry, or this like collective mission that we all have. Like, you are kind of pioneering this work, right, of death alchemy. But when I even think of the word alchemy, it's like everyone plays a role in it. And it's like we are all death alchemists in our own way if we choose to be. And
yes.
that is something that I got from you and your content, and you inspired me, right? And I feel like we all essentially can be alchemists in several ways, but especially
Mm-hmm.
with death, because this is something that so many communities, And just our world in Western society is death phobic, like you said. And so we all have a role to play to alchemize and democratize access to this information. And so, yeah, I wanted to share that with you. Like, you're inspiring other people to internalize what it means to be a death alchemist themselves.
My work here is done. I'm just kidding.
Boom.
Thank you.
Mic drop.
Thank you. That's it. That's it. That's exactly what I want. I want people to, I think the tagline is like, transform your relationship to death so you can live a full, authentic life.
Yeah.
Because if you're afraid of death, you're not going to be living a full life. Sorry.
Absolutely.
That's just the reality of it. Because then you're operating out of fear.
Yeah.
You know, and denial.
Absolutely.
So work on that, y'all.
Yep.
Love you.
Absolutely. And with that, right, I also feel like, and that's also, it just relates to griefsense too. It's like, as we are alchemizing, right, or just becoming death alchemists, tap into your inner griefsense. Like, once you have access to all of this information, how can you have an inner knowing, an inner sense to want to live presently, to want to live fully, right? Like, we have all of these things to do. We should plan for death. We should have these conversations with our families. We should reconsider the things that we're doing in our life and how we should better be spending our time with more intention. And we should confront our mortality. We should honor our loved ones, and we should live presently. And that's all what griefsense is all about. And so I just feel so validated right now.
I bow down to you as well, Mimi, because this is not easy work, and you're killing it. You're doing it.
Thank you.
You should be proud of yourself. This was such an honor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Adriana, for your time. And y'all make sure you follow the Death Alchemist on Instagram. Catch you on the next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Griefsense Familia. That wraps up another episode of the Griefsense podcast. If this resonated with you, please feel free to share with someone who will appreciate it, and tell a friend to tell a friend. Also, I'm a firm believer that feedback is a gift. So, I'm just saying, I won't be mad if you decide to leave a review and a rating of your experience on the podcast so far. Also, let's help each other find community in grief, and let's amplify these stories far and wide. Thank you for tuning in. En solidarity y con mucho amor, Mimi.